There are two ways you can admire greatness. The first way is to simply stand back and appreciate it. The second way, though, is to actually begin to resemble it. You appreciate the greatness so much that it begins to change you. In this week's Parsha, the Torah commands us, with the Pasuk telling us, Ubai tidbakum, that you should be attached, you should cleave to Hashem. Our go-to commentary on the Torah, Rashi, tells us that this means that we should begin to copy Hashem in his ways. Just like Hashem performed acts of kindness, just like Hashem buried the dead, just like Hashem visited the sick, Rashi tells us just like Hashem did all of these actions, so too we must do so in order to resemble his ways down here. However, here is where the problem starts. Here is not the first place where the Torah tells us that we should connect and cleave to Hashem. The Torah mentions this command to connect to him, to cleave to him, twice before here. Both mentioned in last week's Parsha. But yet, the first time it mentions the command in last week's Parsha, Rashi says nothing. The second time it mentions it in last week's Parsha, Rashi gives a completely different explanation about the importance of connecting to the Talmidei Chachamim, to the rabbis and the scholars. And here, Rashi gives a completely different explanation of following in Hashem's ways. So the question then becomes, which one is it? Is it the first one where Rashi said nothing and we have no idea what it means? Or it's so simple that we just know to understand to connect to God? Or is it the second one discussing the importance of connecting to Talmidei Chachamim, to the rabbis? Or is it the third one which refers to connecting to God in the form of replicating the things that he does? Furthermore, Rashi mentions very oddly specific examples of performing kindness, burying the dead, visiting the sick. What is the significance of all of that? Just say, just like Hashem does good things, so too you do good things. So explains the Rebbe we need to take a step back and understand what exactly is going on in last week's Parsha and in this week's Parsha. Explains the Rebbe that the commandment to connect to him in all three instances simply means to love him, to have love towards Hashem. That is the simple meaning. And therefore, the first time the Torah says it, there is no explanation needed. Connect to him means connect to him through your feelings. However, the second time it mentions it, last week's Parsha, if you look in the context over there, the Torah had already just told us a pasuk beforehand to love Hashem. And therefore, when the Torah right after says to connect to him, it wouldn't be repeating the commandment to love him. And therefore, it must mean something else. Rashi explains over there, we're solving the problem by explaining that the commandment to connect means to connect to the Rabbeim, to connect to the Talmidei Chachamim, to connect to our rabbis. But then comes this week's Parsha, and here we go again. We give the very same commandment to connect to Hashem. It can't mean to love him, because we already spoke about that. In addition to the fact that the context of this Parsha is warnings, so certainly we won't be giving a commandment to love him in the midst of all of that. It can't be to connect to the scholars. We already spoke about that. In addition to the fact that the context of this week's Parsha is about connecting to God. And therefore, Rashi explains what must it mean, the highest level of them all. Don't just love God. Don't just connect to his rabbis. Start following his ways. Start putting your action where your mind is. The Torah commands us 3 times to connect to him, each one teaching a different thing. 1, to have the base love for Hashem. 2, to love his rabbis, to connect to them, to learn from them. But 3, the most important, to start acting on it. Start going above and beyond and acting in a way that God would want you to act in. And therefore the examples are burying the dead, visiting the sick, doing acts of kindness, doing things that you are not expected to do. This is not an outright commandment. No one is forcing you to do so, but yet you're still going to do it. Why? Because the Torah told me I need to start acting in the ways of God. And when we take this to heart, and we don't just start thinking about God, we don't just start thinking about Torah, but we end up taking it to the worlds of speech and action, and we actually let it start to change our lives, it won't just stop by us, it will go to the entire world, ultimately accomplishing an incredible elevation, leading us to the coming of Mashiach. May he come speedily in our days. Wishing you a good Shabbos.